The last few months have been pretty profoundly wintry in our landscape. It's probably closer to a historical average as far as the lack of sun. This is what it looks like day after day after day for the most part. Pretty darn cold, well below freezing, hasn't gone above freezing in a while. Fair bit of snow. And this morning I'm going to get started on some chicken chores, and I thought I'd bring folks along. The compost heated feeding system is still operational, but there's definitely some boundaries, some edges, some things I need to be really careful and thoughtful about to make sure things don't freeze up. So I'm going to share this morning about our morning routine with the hens in a really long cold winter, and then bulking out that winter run with insulative carbon-rich material to keep the compost system going. So stick around. With our winter run, part of the chore each night is to make sure we take this front flap and roll it over and clip it closed. If we don't do that at this time of year, we could lose an immense amount of warmth overnight. Already there's lots that just gets lost through the edges, and the composting system in here, pretty much with the cold nights we've been having, every morning when we come in, it's a pretty solid crust over the composting system. But there's some particular areas like that right there that I know are very warm, and over here, believe it or not, there's lots of red wigglers down in there. But before I keep talking about it, let me let these poor hens out. These ladies are really ready for winter to be over. A lot of our hens are over 6 years old. A lot of folks that watch this channel know this. We have some hens in here that are 9 or almost, they're going to be 10 years old in May, which is kind of amazing. Very, very old crew. So each morning we open the door and then also offer a sweet treat for the friends that don't want to leave just yet. All of them will eventually leave each morning, but for today, not so quite fresh, but fresh enough arugula for chickens in the winter. They'll peck at the arugula a little bit, but what they really want this morning are the soaked grains. So I'm going to dump that in the winter run. You see that lady sitting still right there? She will be celebrating her 10th year on the planet in mid-May if she makes it to that. I'm hoping she does. Oh man, that must be tough being the equivalent of 140 or something. All right, let's get the grains going. So each evening this time of year we bring in a bucket half filled with whole seed, as a lot of folks know. It looks like last night Sasha added a bunch of seaweed to this one. We fill it up in our bathtub and let it sit to soak on and take on the water overnight to begin the sprouting process. A lot of our hens will just enjoy eating the soaked seed in the morning. It's the temperature of our home, so it's 60, 70 degrees. Somewhere in there. They only really need a half bucket so long as we actually can be very actively opening up some compost and getting them the good sprouted stuff that's in there. That's next. You can see they really go for it, and it's very, very easy, fast food. I'm fine with that, and if that's what they needed, if that's all we were able to do this time of year, that's fine. The challenge with soaking seed, however, is that once you've hydrated it, if it's exposed to really cold air temperatures on its own, it seizes up. And once it's frozen, it's hard for them to eat, but also it's dead. Like, it definitely, none of this will germinate if it just sits here for too long. So I do need to actively integrate it into warm enough compost context to let the sprouting process to continue. So it's a balance here. If we want to make sure they eat as much as they want, as much as they can right now. We don't want them to have to work really hard in order to survive, but we don't want to just leave it out beyond what they're eating in this moment. It's been tough trying to find that balance, because by noon, if we just leave this stuff out here, it's seized up and they're no longer interested in it, and I know it won't germinate. So in fact, you can see here there's a pile of seed from yesterday that was exposed overnight to cold enough. They'll still be able to eat it, but it's pretty dead. It's no longer useful. You can see all these bones in here. We've been working slowly and steadily on our wood stove, generating a huge amount of bone broth. We've done, I think, 130 quarts of canned bone broth this winter. And so a nice bonus for them is they get to pick at the bones, pick all the meat off once that process is done. That's a lot of extra protein and fat, super important for them in the winter. Chickens are dinosaurs. They eat that stuff. They really enjoy it. So they like the seed, but they definitely like the high protein things. Speaking of, let me see if I can get some worms going. Right over here is probably the most active hot compost portion of this high tunnel, this winter run. Can't quite tell you exactly why that's the case. I think I just err on the side of adding more here. Sasha turns more over here. It just gets a little bit more attention. There's probably a little bit more volume overall. And where all these hens are standing, it's hot enough that if I were to really dig in and turn a lot of it, it would steam us out of here. We couldn't really be in here working. If the steam comes up, it kind of pushes the people out, but the chickens stay low enough that they can work underneath it. So it's truly jungle context. I'm going to open it up just a little bit though, excuse me, to be able to get some worms and some sprouts for those hens that want it. Excuse me, my friends. So this is really the dance at this time of year, is wanting to maintain the warmth of the compost, giving them access to it, not letting it get so hot in certain areas that it cooks the seeds or kills the worms, but also not turning it so much, so frequently, that you ventilate out all of the warmth and lose it. So each day it's about building the pile, moving it along just a little bit, opening it up just a little bit, and I don't think I have a prescription of exactly how to do it. It's really building a feel for it over time. But you can see there's a really good amount. That's a nice healthy compost pile. Let's take a closer look. So I really like to see that in this space. It was basically, I think, 13 degrees Fahrenheit last night. And here's a space that's radiating out enough warmth that, let me put a temp probe in. We'll let that go for a moment and see what it actually gets to. I'm gonna guess it's around 100 degrees, maybe 90. That's a sweet spot. I really don't want it much above 100, 110 Fahrenheit if I can help it. That really facilitates good worm life in here. I think the hens already picked over the worms that were in here, but let's see. Fair bit of sprouts. That's the other thing too. You get quite a bit over 110, 120 Fahrenheit and it starts to cook the seeds. At around 140, 160, you're doing sous vide, right? So you can actually put frozen squash. Like for example, I picked up a bunch of whole butternut squash that were getting tossed from an organic farm. There's these bananas over here that were frozen solid, and we can bury them deep into this hot compost, and it does a steam cooking for them that after a day or two we can dig in and the hens can eat like a nicely, gently cooked version of that. Like here's the squash that went in recently, cooked enough that they can really enjoy it. I'm surprised to see this, interesting to see this. This is reading 70 Fahrenheit, or a little bit above 20 centigrade. A lot lower than I thought it would be. It might creep up a little higher, maybe to 80. But that's fine. Either way, it's well above freezing. Anything above 50 or so Fahrenheit for a composting system in the winter is good enough for red wigglers to keep working. But you get anywhere much lower than that and they can lose their thermal inertia, the compost pile, and seize up and have problems for those worms. So like I said, it's really a balancing act. You can see on the far end here where we've got our compost that's finishing, I add plastic on top. It's not that nice looking, but this area, we'd like to be able to harvest this compost out in the spring. This is close enough to finish to be good. But if we keep having this cold weather and there's not very active composting happening, this could turn into a block of ice before then. So sooner than later, we need to cap what we'll call our finished compost for the winter, put poly on top, and then maybe insulate with some leaves or something else. So that's a good enough start for the morning, is to open up a little bit of compost to give them that activity and that warmth. Some of them just want to sit on it. Some of them want to actively seek out material that they can eat. Both things are valid and nice on a morning like this. It's just celebrating being alive another day as an old hen is good enough. And I think what I can do though is on this side, this is cooled off enough. It's very rich in organic matter. It's just got a different feel for some reason. This side of the compost, the west side, there's a fair bit of red wiggler in here. So I'm going to move some of the crustier, icy stuff out of the way, and then move some red wiggler rich material over, and then cap it with feed material that once it starts to thaw out from the walkway, can feed the red wigglers and keep them going in a good way. So it's got a little bit of a crust to it, which if we put other borderline cooling off compost right on top of the icy crust. That's a good way to stall it out. We can lose the inertia very easily with that. So I'm just skimming the ice. That's chunky enough. I'm going to put it back in the walkway. We'll reassess that later. And even though there's ice right on top there, just a little ways down, we're getting into some meat, some bones. Here's some cabbages that were buried. And I know right around 8 inches to a foot down, the red wigglers begin again. And you can see where soaked seed from the other day was buried in here. In fact, let me pause and take a look at this. So this is a good enough, kind of decent compost. If you're in a warmer, oh, she's eating. That was a worm that was sitting particularly still. I suspect they were on their way to passing away from the cold exposure from being turned yesterday. It's the bummer with it, is if you're feeding hens the worms, then the worms are suffering. Ideally, you're setting up pockets where the worms can really expand nicely. But this has got a nice combination. There's seed that can sprout. It's a little cold for me. I'd be psyched to see it a little warmer. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. I'm going to add leaves into this. That's a nice, gentle, steady accelerant. It aerates, it adds carbon, it adds mineral, and it seems to be able to insulate in a way that helps the compost kick off again. But you can see this is what we're dealing with nonstop, is crust on the surface, finding that balance between how much of that crust do you integrate to cool and stall the compost. This compost over here that is piping hot underneath, you can see our proud gentleman sitting atop the warmest part of the compost with his ladies relaxing. This area can, within reason, accept chunks of ice, chunks of frozen feed material, and thaw it out and continue on composting, but within reason. So if we were to open this up and fill it with a cubic yard of just solid ice frozen stuff, it would stall this compost out too. So this is our main heat source in here, our main source of like very active digestion of material, but also replication of the little bacteria and fungi and all the different crew that do the decomposition. So this is pretty critical. And also for the sake of the hens, this is where they sit all day to get warmth and really feel relaxed. So very much this time of year, you know, how much do we take, how much do we move? I'll skim a little bit more over here, move it along, see if we can get some more very active red wigglers and sprouting seed. Maybe hide a little bit of the seed now that they're starting to wind down eating that, and then see where we are. I think visually this is more fun to demonstrate to people this part of the composting system, but the reality is I don't like to necessarily dig into here a whole lot. I like to let them work their way in. But here's the seed that was added this morning. I'm going to move it along just a little bit and flip it. I'm not burying it deep in where it's going to burn up and kill the seeds. Just enough that they've got to work a little bit for it now, and also just enough that the exposure to cold air won't kill this seed that has the potential to sprout. And now I'm getting in, again, just a little bit, keeping that nucleus really healthy deep down in. Let's take a closer look at this. This is pretty exciting in here. I keep saying it's exciting. I guess it really only is if you're into composting, but hopefully people who are watching this far really are. Good steam, good aroma. It's a little bit aromatic. I probably would do well to add some extra chips and leaves. You can see the most active hens are these white ones. They're the ones that are actively laying, so they have the most protein needs, and they know exactly what they're looking for. They are getting all the worms. You probably saw them eat most of them. The younger hens that are actively laying, they are really the ones that do the most work to turn the compost. And then the ones that are in retirement age do that all day. And that's fine. They're helping to insulate the compost with their sleeping bodies. But you can see they're working through here. Red wiggler life is strong in this space. This is probably again around 80 Fahrenheit, maybe a little warmer. It's sprouting seeds. You can see she's eating sprouts. To me, that this is what's happening when it looks like this just a few feet away still feels like a miracle. Thermophilic digestion of material, thermophilic bacteria doing work to generate compost with just a little bit of buffering is nothing short of miraculous to me. But I want to add a little bit of material more on top of this, turn this a little bit more, maybe get these bananas in so that they can warm up and become a sugar and mineral protein source for them a little later, and then think about adding in some more leaves. Nice and warm, thawed out, it's steaming, and then even just a foot away there's a crust just starting to form here. So I'm going to put that on top of the area that's releasing excess steam. That's a really nice way. Integrating the cold down and in stalls out the compost. Putting the ice cold on top acts as an insulator, so the excess warmth thaws out that material slowly. It's kind of a nice, gentle introduction to cold feedstock into a compost pile you're trying to keep warm in a cold climate. Pretty rewarding to see. I dug down a little bit further than I thought I would, because I kind of sensed there'd be more red wigglers down and in there, and I want to make sure the hens have access. These look like younger ones to me, to my eye. Let me know what you think if you're into red wigglers. I think this is letting me know there is some reproduction happening within there. I think the hen's plucked out a few already. She's going for older seed that didn't necessarily sprout, but probably has some reason that she likes it. You can see here's where nice chunks of wood are helpful. This is a piece of charcoal that didn't finish in the wood stove. Added it in. The worms really have affinity for charcoal. I don't know exactly why that is, but if you add uninoculated charcoal chunks to your chicken composting system, that's where the worms will almost certainly be. I'll grab a sled from one of our storage areas and probably chip away at not all of, but a fair bit of the dried leaves that we set up in the leaf corral in the fall, and bring a bunch of loads of leaf. Ideally it would be nice and dry, but that's fine if it isn't. And I can dump it right into the walkway in here. The hens can kick it apart a little. It'll help to insulate the material in the walkway, and then we can take it and fold it in to the compost over the next few days, and that'll reinvigorate some of these quieter parts of the compost like here, and also help add insulation and carbon and mineral and aeration for the active spots that are starting to get a little aromatic. I like to use a heavy-duty sled for this kind of work this time of year because of the nice soft fluffy snow, and also because our gate, with all the freezing icy rain and lockup and snow, that's about as open as it gets. So enough room for a sled to come through, but not enough for a wheelbarrow. Not till we get some sort of thawing. Been caching sacks of crushed charcoal from making biochar in our wood stove. I've documented that in past videos. I got 3 bags here. I'm going to dedicate probably 1 or maybe 2 to the chicken yard today. Love being able to generate this kind of resource in the winter months and have the heat from this process heat our home too. Biochar in a wood stove has been a really beautiful situation for us. I'm not going to get fussy about getting the snow off of this or whatever. It'll turn into water later. It might just stall it out for now, but I can't get too crazy with this. Particularly icy chunk there and kind of hard to dig into. It's a good reminder for next year for me to prioritize getting a better cover, actual full contiguous poly cover rather than scraps over this in the fall, and keeping the leaves nice and dry. It just makes life easier. Dry sawdust, dry wood chips, dry leaves kept dry in the winter is way easier to work with this time of year, especially when you're tired of dealing with the ice. Beautiful reminder of what leaves do. I mean, imagine if you were deep in the woods under a really big old canopy. You can see down below the leaves are, I mean, we haven't added urine or compost tea or anything to activate this. It's just leaves. There's no layering, no lasagna gardening. It's just leaves. And down in there, it's just about completely thawed out. I see moisture, water. And so if you were a black walnut seed or hickory seed that a squirrel pushed deep down into this, it'd have a very good chance of germinating, even with, 90 days below freezing and snow and winds and zero sun. So leaves are pretty miraculous in a lot of different ways. It's a good reminder. Deep deposition goes a long way. I bet the soil underneath this leaf pile hasn't fluctuated much since November when the leaves were added. I've got my pure carbon of straight charcoal. No need for that to be an explicit rule of adding in, but if you can generate charcoal in the fall or winter, integrate it into your composting system to beautiful effect of promoting red wiggler life and holding on to excess nutrient. And every creature in the system, including future generations, will thank you for integrating charcoal. I'm going to dump that out first and walk it in a little. I need to be a little thoughtful about the dust that comes off of that. The charcoal gets dumped where we walk, so we can crush it a little further before it gets folded in. It'll really sit still out here for a while, but that's fine. I'm going to put a little bit of leaves on top so it doesn't kick up dust every time the hens or I walk over it. It'll do very little being right outside the winter run, but it's a short commute now to be integrated in, so as things thaw a little we can fold it in. I'm going to add a few more layers of leaves on the inside. That'll insulate where the red wigglers are on both sides of this to be able to get in and start eating that food. So even though it's frozen right now, if we insulate enough and give it enough days, the warmth from down below will move its way up and into the food stuff, and the worms will migrate in, and then we can use the hay fork to bring it back over later on. Lots of stuff going on here. It looks kind of wild and ridiculous to dump this much leaves into the beginning of a composting system. This time of year is going to add a huge amount of insulation. Once it's folded into the compost, it's going to be aeration, carbon, all the things I mentioned. Plus, leaves innately have a ton of mineral, and as the chickens shred and peck them apart to get the sprouts and the worms mixed throughout, the charcoal mixed throughout, that'll break it down so that by spring, the compost can move to the garden and the worms in the garden can do the final liberation of the nutrients that the leaves hold. So for $0 plus packing material in the form of the bags, I can't imagine a better input for our system is collecting leaves in the fall. And one of their favorite things for hens is to play in leaves, and they, for the end of February, to be able to play in some fresh leaves from the fall feels pretty spectacular. I'm going to add a little bit of hot compost to the leaves, not a lot, but just enough to start spiking little inoculation points of both worms and biota that might help digest the leaves. A little goes a long way. And then if what we want is to have the hens work through the leaves and integrate those inoculation points, all we need to do is add some seed. And a little bit of seed, pretty universally with the chickens, creates the interest to get involved. So it looks like I'm being rude here, but I'm just going to hide the seeds just a little bit. They'll smell them, or they'll sense them, they'll come to work for them. They'll get seeds, they'll get a good reward for their minor amount of effort, and in doing so they'll start the shredding of the leaves, they'll start kicking the worms that are in those little pockets throughout. I don't want to have to do all that work, not because I'm lazy, but I think they get better pleasure and better quality of life and more food if they can do the work. But it's on us to design systems that make it easy and ready to go for them to do that work, if that makes sense. Maybe that's of value to some folks that are experimenting with compost feeding hens in a cold climate, not unlike ours. So we are central New York, zone 5B, 6A, moving more towards, but this winter a little bit closer to a 5B or a deeper, colder winter. It's challenging to keep a warm composting system active through the entire winter, but it's absolutely doable. Let me know in the comments what sort of questions you have or issues you have, other ideas that you've come up with that have really helped keeping sprouts and worms and live, vibrant food for your lovely hen friends active even when the world looks like this outside and will continue to look like this for maybe even a month more. This is a challenging context to raise hens In the summer, it's quite easy, but we've got, a good 4 months potential of that experience, and these sort of season extension spaces, phenomenally useful. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'm going to do a little chicken TV now.